You know, I've been told you should be very careful about choosing the hills upon which you will die, but this is one I've chosen. Well, hello and welcome back to The Commonplace. My name is Autumn, and today we are going to talk about a question that I am asked almost weekly, and that is, in what order should I read the Chronicles of Narnia to my children? But really the right question is, in what order should I read them to myself? Now, if you're thinking, wow, that's an odd question for you to be asked almost weekly, it's not. So if you're at all familiar with the Commonplace podcast, particularly season 1, then you know that Narnia is a great love of mine. One of the greatest loves of mine. And it is explicitly in almost every episode in season 1. And if you're a good student of season 2 and the current season 3, then you know it's sneakily in the rest of them. I love the Chronicles of Narnia. In fact, I would say if we were playing that game about which book would you bring if you could only bring one on the desert island for forever, I would bring one volume containing all 7 books, and that is not cheating. I was actually just talking to my 6-year-old the other day, and she was using a funny phrase, which she has a lot of, I would say, very English or British phrasing in her mind because of the literature we read. So she dropped this one, and it was really cute, and I laughed, and she was startled by my laughter and said, well, I got it from the Chronicles of Narnia. I get all of my best things from Narnia. And I thought, yeah, me too. God willing, when I make it to glory, C.S. Lewis is my shining one. He's the one who comes to meet me a la Great Divorce. And he will be like, you're the girl who kept stealing all my phrases, aren't you? And I will be like, yes, happy to do so and pass them on so that you may become a classic. If you don't know, Lewis does not count as a classic yet, but I think he will be. So anyways, on to Narnia. There is a way to read these books, okay? Here are the 7. I do not think this is negotiable. This is not a personal preference sort of thing. In fact, I have gone to battle over this many times. And I do want you to know this is a very lighthearted video for the Mother Culture series. I actually do think everyone needs to read Narnia for themselves, not just to read to your children. In fact, if you don't know Lewis's opinion on this and many others, if a child's book is only appealing to a child, it is not a good book. It is not a good children's book. They should be interesting to us as well. And so I actually think everyone should read Narnia. Narnia changed my life quite literally as I was coming into the classical world, and I do use Narnia language to talk about the wardrobe, coming through the wardrobe and realizing that the world is far more enchanting. That's what classical education does for a lot of people, not just me. And it was these 7 books that put a hard pause on what had been my literary life for about 8 years prior to that, which was basically just practical theology reads, getting my head wrapped around doctrinal points and ideas. And Narnia showed that I have other parts to me. I am not just a brain. God has never treated me like I am just a brain. But the way I was reading was doing that to myself, and it was not forming me in a whole way, and it wasn't even forming me in a good way because it failed to acknowledge the rest of me as an image bearer. And Narnia blew open that door for me, and I have not been the same since. I headed east out of the wardrobe and brought these books with me. So this is a very lighthearted video today for our Mother Culture series. I am definitely having fun with what are very strong thoughts and feelings around here, but I do hope you actually get a little bit more familiar with the books and the order that you should introduce your children to them, because I do think it matters. Now, here at the start, I will say that once C.S. Lewis did answer a letter from a child about the order that they should read the books in. And he said that perhaps it would make sense to read them in chronological order, which is how many books are printed now. They are printed into chronological order of the storyline. And then he said, well, maybe it didn't really matter much at all. And it's so funny that he would be so wrong about his own books. It does matter. So let's get started. The first book that you should absolutely read to yourself or your children is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This does matter. Yes, it was the first one written, but there are elements to this book that are important. And the 2 most important, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, is that 1, you need to go into Narnia with Lucy Pevensey, because you need to see Narnia the way Lucy sees it. So for Lewis, in the Chronicles of Narnia especially, but this was kind of generally throughout his work, he very much believed in the atmosphere of a story. Like, the atmosphere should say the true things, not the story. And so the atmosphere of Narnia is incredibly important. And as you get familiar with the books and the characters, you see that just being in Narnia for a little while changes who they are. They're a little more noble, a little more courageous, a little more true and steadfast. The atmosphere matters. And so Lucy is our character with the right heart posture going into Narnia. She sees rightly from the start. And in order for your children to enter that world, that enchanting world, they have to come with Lucy as their Virgil, as their guide. It's very important that that is how you meet Narnia. The one that the publishers will put first is The Magician's Nephew, which is the origin story of Narnia, but you don't have the right understanding of Narnia or the characters that are featured in Magician's Nephew if you start there. So that's the first thing. You must go into Narnia with Lucy. Gives your children the right eyes from the start. The second thing is that Aslan is very much the king in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You have a full understanding of his majestic nature, of his steadfastness, of his goodness, of his, I would say, terribleness in the more traditional sense of the word. Like, it's untamable. It's a little unnerving. You're a little in awe and a little scared at the same time. Like, you meet Aslan in that way in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And you also have very obvious structure to Narnia itself. You understand there's a usurper in your midst. You understand that you have a right king. The people know who Aslan is. They remember the battle they're in. At different parts in the story in other books, people have forgotten. It's been so long. They don't really believe the stories anymore. And that can be helpful for your child to understand the world they live in now, because we meet Aslan in Narnia so we can better find him in our world. But it's all very clear in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And that's actually one critique that I hear of Narnia from the super cool people who will say that it's an allegory that's too on the nose, as if we are all too mature and deep and, I don't know, ironic and indie to like that. But no, it builds out the world in a perfect way for a child to enter it and understand the larger story that we live in. The wardrobe is the way to go. You must enter through the wardrobe. And it also holds one of my favorite lines, which is that death is now working backwards. And that idea has just come to mind in so many different points in my life and in so much of my work. And it's here, it's in this one. So I'm very fond of this one. This book probably has made me long for Christ more than any other book. And I'm not ashamed of that. This is a wonderful story, and Aslan is a beautiful picture of Christ. So please start here. If you don't start here, you are doing it wrong. So then in terms of the storyline, The Horse and His Boy comes next. And so that's how publishers put the set together. But it's happening simultaneously, like the Pevensies are still ruling Narnia when this story starts, but you cannot go here next. You can't. Your children will probably lose interest in the Narnia series because this one doesn't make sense then. You cannot read it next. So glad you didn't even pick it up, because you knew obviously that would be too much of an obvious answer. No. The next one you go to is Prince Caspian. And now here is where you couldn't. You couldn't change what I'm gonna say. You have to read Prince Caspian before you read The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, because you don't know who Caspian is. You don't understand the storyline. It's important to understand the histories, the background to this story. And so Prince Caspian comes next. The Pevensies are pulled back into Narnia. Caspian calls for help. Aslan brings them back. And Aslan is less of a central role in this book, but you begin to see how Aslan is working by allowing the people in his world to do real work. So one of my favorite things at the end of this book is that Reepicheep, who is a very noble mouse, he's very valiant, you just love him, very honorable, he has gotten wounded in the battle. And Aslan is there. He could very easily just make him better. But he doesn't. He calls to Lucy, who still has her healing cordial that she received from Father Christmas back in the wardrobe book, and has her administer what is needed to save Reepicheep. And isn't that such a beautiful picture of how God invites us into cooperation with him in his world? He doesn't just go around doing everything, even though ultimately it is his work, but he allows us to have real agency and to exercise that, to choose what is good, to become virtuous, and then let that move us meaningfully in his world. And so Caspian has to come next, because The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, there's too much you need to know, which means this one follows this one. We are about to lose some of our Pevensies here, and we're about to find some new characters here. So this is kind of like a bridge between two of the books. And I think it's important that they come together, and they come after Wardrobe. There's enough that your child recognizes and feels attached to that they then can allow Narnia to expand beyond just Cair Paravel and the Lantern Waste into other parts of the Narnian world, like on the map. But also they can go on new adventures as well and see different parts of Aslan's character and personality. I've not read Planet Narnia yet. It's on my list this year. I can't remember his name either. I want to say it's Ward wrote the book, but Planet Narnia is the title. And he believed there was a secret, a kind of secret to Narnia, which Lewis was very big on secrets in literary work, so I could see it being a thing. Like, he never mentioned it to anyone, but they follow what were the 7 planets as understood in medieval cosmology, and that Aslan sort of embodies the different like spirits or personalities of those planets, because Aslan does take a very different role and feel in each book. And so these two pair well together for your child to kind of follow that. And also in Dawn Treader, you meet Eustace Scrubb, and Eustace Scrubb is a thing at my house. We do not want to be like Eustace Scrubb at the beginning of this book. Eustace Scrubb is quite the modern man. There are some great sections in this probably first 2 chapters describing how Eustace sees the world, and it's just grates on your heart, and yet it is the way the modern man sees the world. I would also say between these 2 books, you start to see how easy it is to lose sense of real reality when you only engage with your 5 senses. This happens a lot to the children as they're moving through problems in Narnia. They start to depend on themselves, their sight, what they understand, and they have less trust. Some of the characters, not all of them, but they have less faith and trust in Aslan, and the little bits of, I would say, the veil spreading for them to see, they don't follow that. They kind of depend on themselves. And you do see the harm that causes, and you do see the danger involved. But you also begin to see that being in Narnia, like I said, is a transcendent place that does something to you. Actually, in Common House, which is like my Patreon but better because it's not a Patreon, I shared about this war my family had with another family, and we declared war on them. It was very fun, but we named ourselves the House of Pevensey. And for a whole week, my children were living, breathing, eating Narnia as we prepared for this battle. They had clothing put on. We did a battle plan. We made maps. We ran different military plans that we had. And then the day of the battle, we have a wardrobe in our house, of course, and I sent them in one by one and then put their clothes on and brought them back out. So they came out as Narnians. And I made this, I guess essentially would be like a reel, but I did this little film just for me to keep, and it is actually in Common House. I very rarely show anything about my personal family, even in Common House, because it's their privacy. You can give me $9 and I'm still not going to violate their privacy. But this one was an encouragement of how story can be embodied, how the atmosphere of something like Narnia changes you. My kids stood a lot taller. They acted more nobly. They felt the weight of glory, as Lewis would say. And so in these 2 books, I see that the most in the kids, like in the story, the characters, I see them change because they've met Aslan and they've been in his world, and that should do something to you. And it does very clearly in these 2 books. So I talked a little bit about the silver chair before. I was talking about the age of evil enchantment, and I was talking about how platonic this is with like the allegory of a cave and part of us. So we meet a new character here. So I do think it needs to follow Voyage of the Dawn Treader because you come with Eustace, but Eustace brings someone else. And actually her name is Jill. And one of my favorite things is she thinks that she came to Narnia by her own accord, but Aslan says, "You would not have come if I had not been calling." And so this book explores a lot of great ideas like the other ones, but in a slightly new format. And so we're thinking about what is reality, what is true, what is sight, how are we enchanted and entangled by the things around us, how quickly do we lose touch with reality, different things like that, as well as adventure and like our ultimate hunger and thirst and how that's satisfied. So the silver chair comes after the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Now this is one that I think people I really respect in the classical world love the most, and I am planning on yet another read of it because it's not one that I do. And so I just need to figure out what's going on. Eustace and Jill do not hold my heart the way the Pevensies do, so that may just be a personal thing about it, but I do think it needs to follow with the storyline as Eustace comes back, because Eustace is a very different boy after he has met Aslan. And I will say, Voyage of Dawn Treader, Eustace by the water is my single favorite scene in all 7 books. You'll know when you get there. But if you're curious, Edmund is my favorite character. And so now is when we introduce Hoarseness Boy. This is my favorite book. Yes, you can have that many different specifications for awards for Narnia, as I do. But this is actually my favorite story in the series. But this book is almost like something like the Book of Esther, where it doesn't seem like God is doing anything. Like he's not even mentioned. Aslan is barely in this book. You have no idea what's going on with him. He's completely silent. He's completely invisible. But if you know Aslan, if you have read the other 4 books, then you actually can see him throughout the story. And what a tremendous gift is that to train that kind of sight and understanding in your child, that if they are familiar with God, if they are familiar with the way his works look, the way he moves, the things he loves, then when they are in a time and place where they cannot see that so clearly, he doesn't feel near, he doesn't feel present, they can look for the little things they can recognize and see that he actually has been there all of the time, doing all of the things out of love for you. And so this book, wonderful, but it has to come at this point in the series because otherwise your children don't know what's going on. You don't know what's going on. You're like, okay, where are we? Who are these people? Why is this happening? Why is this horse talking? What's going on? But if you've read the other stories, then this fits in really well. Plus you come back to the Pevensies because, like I said earlier, they are reigning in Narnia at this point. And so we actually do have them come at a point in the story. Now this is when you go back to The Magician's Nephew. So that is what they say is the first book, but it's not, it's the 6th book. And Magician's Nephew is the origin story. So at this point, you know Jadis, the White Witch, or as we hear in our British audiobook, Jadis. You know who she is, you know who Aslan is, you know there's been this big cosmic battle, that there was magic, but then there was deeper magic, and all sorts of things like that. If you're worried about magic, at least watch my fairy tale videos. And this goes back and tells you what happens. You're also introduced to Diggory the Professor. But Diggory is a little boy. So it kind of starts to loop back into wardrobe. You're brought in, you understand what happened. It's a delightful story. It's really funny. Uncle Andrew is sad and pathetic, but he, in that way, makes me laugh. And when you do that, when you jump over to Last Battle, you are going to find Diggory again. And so there is a connection point between these two. But of course, you must end on the last battle because it is, in fact, the last battle. We've had a taste of Aslan's country before in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but this is where we ultimately tie the story together and see what it looks like to come further up and further in. And that is the way you must read them. There is no other option. Thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions, leave them below, unless your questions are about reading them in a different order, because I already said you can't. And so that's how you read the Chronicles of Narnia. Like, that is the only way to read them, obviously. And I hope that you do. I hope you read them for yourself and then you read them to your children and that you read them over and over again. These books are probably what has most formed the moral formation of my children as well as their mythic imagination. In our family, we breathe Narnia, we think Narnia, and it is one of the greatest ways to see how enchanting our actual world is. I'll talk to you guys soon.